This conference will now be recorded.
Awesome. Maybe we will just get started, get the formalities out of the way. So thank you everyone for joining us this morning. My name is Merielee Ray, and I am one of the funding and development managers in the Arts and Cultural Funding team. Online with me are my colleagues, Nikita Holcomb, Tammy Close, Ian Cifuentes, and shortly Shane Grace should be coming back soon. And of course, we are here to chat to members of the festival Artform Advisory Board. So, go. We just have a couple of housekeeping notes. So if you can please keep your cameras. Oh, sorry. This webinar is being recorded, and an edited version will be published online. So for anyone who can't attend, they can access this information. And then please keep your cameras on mute while we're presenting. But at the end, we'll definitely give you the opportunity to speak to us. Just to see things a little bit better, there's a you can see view everyone right in the middle of your screen. If you click on that and then select view active cameras, it will just give you a better feel for what's actually being shown. And if you also just need to, you can adjust the size of your screen by clicking on the zoom button, which is the plus and minus button on your screen. You're most welcome to use the chat box at any time. You can find the chat box on the top right-hand corner of your screen. It's a little speech bubble. Please use that chat box if you have any questions, comments, or if you're having any technical issues, and one of us will come and help you. We also have some live captions available for this if you need that. So the link is just on in the chat box for you. Please use that link and then use the session ID that's also been given to you in the chat box. I would just like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which we live and work. I'm currently on Darug Nation of the Darug people. I would also like to pay my respects to elders past, present, and emerging. And on that, I would love to extend my welcome and thank you to Kerri and David. Just a little bit of an intro on Kerri and David. So Kerri is the director and CEO of the Sydney Fringe Festival, and she is also co-chair of City of Sydney's Nightlife and Creative Sector Advisory Panel. So Kerri is the founder and director of the Old 505 Theatre and Venue 505. In her past life, she was also a curator for small to medium independent theatres and live music venues. Thank you so much, Kerri, for joining us today.
Pleasure.
And David Francis is the executive director of Four Winds. So Four Winds is a year-round organization that delivers the Four Wind Festival during Easter. So David also has managerial and directorial experience with the Sydney Philharmonia Choirs and the Arts Council of England. Thank you so much, David, for your time also.
Thank you. It's good to be with you.
And so the programs, just to cover it off, the programs that Kerri and David would be talking about today are the individual and organization programs under the Arts and Cultural Funding Program, which are, one is just simply called project funding. We also have creative query projects and annual organization project. So the information about these programs and their relevant guidelines are available on the Create New South Wales website. If you do need them in any other formats, please get in touch with us and we'll be able to give you that. But I also just wanted to mention that we have a couple of other programs under the ACFP. One of them is the Small Project Grants, which is a grant that you could apply for up to $5,000 and is open all year round. The other one is the Creative Leadership Opportunities, which are fellowship that we have with our partner organizations. We have a few open now, including a conductor fellowship with the Sydney Youth Orchestras, as well as a musical theatre fellowship with Hayes Theatre, and we have a few more opening in the next couple of weeks. Again, all of that information is available on the Create New South Wales website, so please do check them out, and also please sign up to our e-news. But on that note, let's get this show on the road. And we're going to be starting with the top 3 tips from David on how to make an application. So David, what are your 3 tips?
Thank you, Merielee, and thank you for the welcome. I'm talking to you from the land of the Jurundjatjara people of the Yuin Nation, and I'd just like to pay my respect to their elders past, present and emerging. And thank you to everybody who's joined the webinar and giving up an hour of your time to hear our thoughts. And really my first thought here is that we're all artists, we're all arts organizations, and we're applying to an organization that really does want to support the arts. So really put the art up front in the application here. Get the panel excited, be really clear what you're doing from an artistic perspective right up front. Because from the perspective of somebody who has to read a lot of the applications, it's those applications that I know what they're doing really quickly and that really gets my energy flowing, makes me really disposed to then sort of having a deeper experience with that application. If I have to wade through a lot of stuff to try and find out what it is that you're doing, I'm already just a little bit kind of fatigued before I've even got going. So I think this is a really important thing. So get the panel excited and put the art up front. The next one is a big one, and Kerri and I had some consultation with our colleagues on the festival panel before we delivered this seminar, and this was something that came up, which is really that often what we see is a disjoint between the narrative in the application and what is then presented in the budget. So for instance, somebody might say, we're going to grow our audience by 10%, and then you look at the box office figures in the budget and there's no growth, or it might be that the growth is not 10% at all. So you need to make sure that those things match up. The other thing there for me is actually giving as much detail as you can in the budget. So for instance, when you're saying here's a number that relates to, say, artist travel, actually if you can give some detail about how that's calculated, it really helps us understand what can often be very, very large numbers. And sometimes if we have very large numbers and we have a narrative that doesn't match the application and the story that's being told in the application, it suddenly undermines what you're applying for, because we just can't put all the pieces together. So it begins to raise questions in our mind. And then the last, my last tip here really is this, what I call the art of generalization. I think there's a real temptation for people to make generalizations in order to boost their application. So they make sort of grand statements about, the needs of particular sectors of people or about their audience, but actually then there's no evidence to show where that statement has come from or why that's important and relevant to this application. And, one of the ones, I work on the far south coast of New South Wales, or, in a remote rural context. So, when I see comments about the needs of rural audiences and remote audiences, actually, I know a lot about that. So, a red flag is going to rise for me when I see a generalized statement about the needs of a rural audience, actually, when there's no evidence to support what it is you're talking about or why that's important for your organization. And I think that's true across the board. So the festivals board is made up of very, very experienced people all of whom are going to pick up on those points that are unsubstantiated and say, well, hang on a minute, you know, why are they saying that, and where's the evidence to back that up? So I think that the kind of the art of generalization can be a real red flag for the panel. So those are my three.
No, I really like that. You know, we do talk about art, but maybe don't talk about the art of generalization.
Yeah.
Alrighty. Thank you, David. Those are very important insights. And now, Kerri, what are your top 3 tips?
I compiled these top 3 tips by re-looking at all of my notes over the last couple of rounds, actually, and having a look at where the most common replication of my notes and feedback was. So the first one for me is use your word count wisely and ensure that the correct priority area is addressed. When we're writing our grant applications, and I know this from when I write them as well, we're trying to cram as much information as we possibly can into a smallish word count. And there is a tendency to just talk about you and your organisation and the work you do, but you really do need to address the specific question that is being asked. That really is all we have to go on as a primary first port of call to answer what we are responsible for making our decision to provide money to you from. And whilst there is supporting documents, and we do absolutely trawl through those and go through them, really we have to assess on what the specific questions are. So my advice is use your word count so wisely. Go back over and over and over and make sure that you've really addressed as clearly as you can those specific questions. And the biggest mistake that I've seen in the last couple of rounds is that when priority areas have been selected, the actual copy that we're reading in response to that priority area is addressing something else. And even if it's a great point, and even if you're using it as a space to give us a bit more information about something else, we have to mark you on how you've responded to that specific area, and we have to grade that, and that's what makes our marks. So be really, really careful when you're selecting your priority area, and really interrogate what you want to say that puts you in the best position, and make sure it's matching the right priority area. Is a big one. My second one is utilize supporting material. We do go through it, we really do. We sit there and read every piece of material that you send to us because we want to give you the money. And the biggest problem that I see, and it's similarly to David's with his grand general statements, is that people will make claims around strategies, or that they have thought through things, that they have a strategy in place, whether it's reaching diverse audiences or increasing partnership revenue, but there's actually no strategic documents provided in the support material. If you're going to make those claims, and if you in fact do have those strategies in place, absolutely attach them as supporting documents, because if we see that and we're then able to read those documents and can see that you thoroughly thought those things through and you have those mechanisms in place, you will get marked higher. If you don't have them, don't say it. If you really don't have those strategies, don't put it in there. And then the other big one for me is ensuring that your ask is commensurate with your experience and project stage. Absolutely, and I think we'll address it a little later on in this talk. We're all for supporting brand new projects and great ideas, but be mindful that you need to be realistic about your level of ask in this instance. And I like to think of it as not like absolutely go for gold, but be clever and think long term about it. Approach your relationship with Create as an ongoing partnership. If you are starting a new project, apply for a phase 1, or for the community consultation stage, or for a pilot year, or testing it out, and then come back the next year as you're building a relationship with the Artform Board and Create, and demonstrate the success, and then apply for a next round for the next year. If you are presenting a project with very little evidence because it hasn't happened yet, very little connection to community or support or consultation done, and you're going for a full amount of funding, it's very difficult for us to sign off on that. And when you get your feedback from Create that there was lots of applications and it was incredibly competitive, that is legitimately true. They tell you the truth. We have so many applications that even if your amount that you're asking for in your world doesn't seem unrealistic or unfair to ask for, $50,000 say, to put on a massive festival, that's actually a lot of money for us when we're talking about dividing up our pool. So be realistic. Think of it in a long-term partnership and think of how you can approach funding in a staged way if that works for your project.
I couldn't agree more. And in fact, if there's anything that I can add to that, I would advise that people do start off small. So in addition to our small project grants, there are of course other sources of funding available, which may be easier to apply to. Local councils and their specific arts department, they have funding opportunities, as well as larger organizations. So keep an eye out for those and do seek the appropriate opportunity for the project that you're wanting to apply for, plus also your experience and level. On that, thank you both. And now, I wonder whether people might have some specific questions. We did get a couple of registered questions online, so we might go through them while we're waiting for people to come up with questions. So the first question is, there's this person who would like to create a music festival in a regional town that's 3 hours north of Sydney. They would love to understand the process required for obtaining funding and an opportunity to co-create with like-minded people. So, would you have any comments about it? It's quite broad and not quite, this program specific.
Yeah, I think it plays into Kerri's point, and I'll let Kerri expand on what she was just saying. But I think for me, Four Winds has its roots. It's celebrating 30 years as an organisation this year, and it does have its roots in a small group of people that got together and were motivated to create a beautiful music festival in this remote and rural context. So I think, playing into Kerri's point, it is about kind of probably starting small and getting funding for that seed idea and the development of that idea and beginning to prove the model. I think there's always that question of, I want versus a community needs, or a community would like to see this activity. And I think that would always strengthen an application to say, this is coming from a group of people, but we've made our consultation with the community and this idea is supported and people are excited about it. And perhaps then what are the kind of wider benefits of that activity to the community in terms of kind of any kind of social cohesion or some economic benefit or whatever that might be as well. So because there may be other motivations for starting that music festival than just a kind of personal motivation to get going. Kerri, what do you think?
Yeah, I think my big one with startup projects is always start local, think global. So start locally, engage your community, talk to people, demonstrate the need and the want, outline your development plan, and that doesn't have to be a big document that's fancy or anything. It can just be, okay, this year we want to achieve this, next year we want to achieve that, here's how we're going to do it. I would also be really rigorous in your assessment. How are you going to assess if it worked, if it was a success? Be nimble enough to change it each year as well is really important when you're embedding authentic relationships within a local community. You need to be really open and transparent and ethical about how you've gone and how you can help your community. And again, to the previous points we were talking about, look to local government for support to start out, look for club grants or grants that are within your community, and that will demonstrate to us that there is local community support as well for that initial phase, and then move on to state or other kind of funding avenues as well. But my top things definitely is starting local with a purview to go bigger, because you absolutely need to have authentic relationships within community if you are going to build a festival that has longevity. Even for us at Sydney Fringe Festival, and we're now the largest independent festival in the state, it's still always about our local relationships. They're just bigger now, but it has to be an authentic relationship with all the stakeholders on the ground.
No, thank you both for that. Really, great insights, and and hopefully that answers that particular question. The next question is a little bit difficult to answer, and again, I'm not even quite sure that it refers to festivals, because it says, how do you go from a pipe dream idea to making it real? I think a lot of that you two would have covered in your previous responses, but yeah, I guess this is coming from someone who is just starting from an idea. So, for someone who is starting from scratch, what are some key initial steps that they can do?
Well, I think you're right. I mean, I think we have sort of covered this from previous responses. But for me, I was just reminded of the conversation that Kerri and I had with our festival colleagues, and thinking about, these funding rounds. That actually, even though it is arguably preferable for Create New South Wales to be supporting organisations that can demonstrate, a whole load of impact and evaluation and great vision and viability and so on. What came up in our discussion was that we have to leave room for that really great idea, and we have to be supportive of that exciting vision that comes from an individual who may not have all of that infrastructure and support around them. So I think the first thing is that if you're feeling hugely confident with your idea, then I would, go for it and put it in, because I think we're certainly receptive for that. But I think in terms of, going from a pipe dream to reality, I mean, I think you have to start delivering some work on the ground and trying out what your proposition and seeing how it's received. And as Kerri was saying, that then molding that into the needs and responses to your audience or your community, whoever it is that you're working with or for. So, and I think that once you begin to build that traction, that will give you the energy then to move on to the next stage. But I think you have to sort of dip your toe into the water, really. Kerri, what do you think?
Yeah, absolutely. And my other piece of advice would be find your champions. Find the people within your community or circle of colleagues or friends, family, who get behind your idea, because really great ideas do start on a micro, and the best ones that have longevity of success, whether that success pathway is only 12 months from a project to delivery or whether it's 30 years like David's festival, they start small and they build up with momentum, and the best projects are like that. So you need to find your champions, because no project, even a solo art piece, happens in isolation with one person. There is always a collaboration or a need for other people to invest in, either in time, in kind, in money, with creative vision. So find your champions within your community, and then forge forward, I say.
And can I just add to that? I mean, as as an organisation, this is something that Four Winds does. So we enable people to sort of come to us with ideas, and we just provide them with some space to begin to develop those ideas. So in terms of those champions that Kerri's talking about, there could be kind of local arts organisations who are willing just to give you some space or some time or some support or advice, just to help you get onto that next step as well. And that's something that we do a lot of at Four Winds.
Exactly. And what I also take from that is you should definitely think about these kind of things outside of funding rounds, that it should just be part of your career progression or the building of your empire. That, you know, it's something that should be happening on a daily basis all year round for as long as you can. The next question that I have is, how do you garner the right support for a creative event in New South Wales?
I think I go back to my start local, think global phrase. You need to get local support first, and that if it's an event, you need local government is a great place to start. Community grants, club grants, you know, all those sorts of funding rounds that are allocated specifically for an area and a region, wherever you are, whether you're in a CBD or in a regional area. I think definitely that's the place to start, but also look to business. You know, look locally to businesses. There are businesses within your communities that will support you if you have a great idea and are wanting to do something within their area, whether it's financially or with resources or space or in-kind support. Certainly leverage you, because once you get those sorts of partnerships on board, you can then leverage that support to get additional income or additional support from other people. It's much easier to make the big cold calls to a local government if you've got business behind you, or vice versa. So find one to start with and then leverage it to get more is my advice.
Well, I think I'd like to, I mean, I agree completely with all of that. And I think there's a stage, particularly if you're an individual artist, which is about saying, you know, you need to generate energy locally around what you're doing as well, so that people are attracted to you, to support you and to be partner with you. And then I guess the other thing with that is that you're going to need to be kind of open-minded. I think from an individual artist point of view, it's very easy to be very dogmatic about this is what I want to do and this is how I want to do it and this is my vision. And but actually, if you're just a little bit more open-minded, a bit more pragmatic, just morphing the project around the edges a bit can just help it move forward and bring those people on board and bring those partners, and suddenly it's beginning to sort of build momentum. I think a kind of an open-minded sort of partnership approach is always more attractive than that kind of very dogmatic, no, this is it, take it or leave it kind of thing.
For sure. And if I could add anything to that, it will be that you should get yourself out there and you should get your work out there. You should be talking to people about your work. You should be, you know, if you don't already have social media accounts, websites and things like that, you should have all those things so that people, as well as businesses and other organizations, can discover you and your work. And, you know, you need to give them the opportunity to be able to find you and subsequently help you. Yeah, that's my 2 cents worth on that.
And it does require quite an entrepreneurial mindset in that respect. So you're absolutely right. Yeah.
For sure. This comment, more than anything, is it comes from someone who wants to be part of the Artform Advisory Board, so that you know, that their particular group can get more opportunities and funding in the future. I think those two don't necessarily come hand in hand, but I'm just curious about your you know, experience in you know, putting in the expression of interest. So yeah, for everyone's information, Create New South Wales open expressions of interest for people that want to be on the Artform Advisory Board. And you know, and then, you know, there's a rigorous selection process for getting on the board. But Kerri and David, do you have any insight into that particular process?
I think it's about, for me, it was about kind of personal motivation, really. I think that I'm, as you said at the beginning, I've been involved with grant makers in the UK. I actually launched a funding body myself in the UK called the Performing Rights Society Foundation. So this is an area which I had a lot of expertise, and I really felt like it was a way in which I could contribute to, you know, the landscape here in New South Wales. So that was a sort of personal motivation, and it's really great from my point of view to be able to meet colleagues on these panels. I was on the classical music panel to start with, now the festivals panel, and it's a really great way for us to really see what's going on right across the sector, to connect with colleagues. And, you know, given where I'm located, that's a really important element for me as well. So I find that, and just reading the applications as a somebody who has to make a lot of funding applications myself, it's very informative and very helpful, you know, in terms of informing my own work and how I approach funding applications.
Yeah,
Kerri?
I think for me, being a part of the board was, I work a lot, passionate advocate for the small to medium sector, not just in the festival land, but in general, across all genres. And it's always been really important to me that that part of the sector is represented on these advisory boards and any kind of funding platforms. And I do a lot of work in the advocacy space on a state and national level for the indie sector. So for me, it's definitely about that. I would say that no Artform Board member is there to push their own organisation forward in any way or better from that. In fact, we have very stringent policies around conflicts of interest. And so it's definitely not helpful in that way, and it shouldn't be, because these are, everyone who is on those boards are there for a more holistic and macro progression of the sector itself, and advocacy for artists. But as David says, yes, you do learn a lot from reading through the applications when you're approaching your own application process.
For sure. No, thank you both for that. And yeah, no, I just have to emphasize that we do have some stringent process around conflicts of interest. And, you know, Artform Board members who may have an application don't even, you know, they can't talk to their applications at all. So the last question from the registrations online is, what grants are available for disability services? I'm aware of a few, but David and Kerri, are you aware of any that you could share?
This isn't an area that we've directly applied for funding for, but I do know that, for instance, our local councils here have got small grant funds for increasing access, for sure. And actually, one of the things that we've seen in light of COVID and in light of the bushfires that affected our region is quite a number of kind of one-off initiatives that is about improving access and sustainability for you know, different sectors of the community. So I think that there are opportunities there at the moment, but it's not an area that I have particular expertise in.
No, nor I. And I lean a lot and rely a lot on Accessible Arts as a platform to find out information around those sorts of funding rounds, and also anything to do with access. So I would recommend heading there for a really good overview and any support that you require.
Mm-hmm. For sure. So yeah, our go-to would be Accessible Arts, specifically for not only the disability side, but from the arts perspective. You know, another great resource would be Community Grants Hub. So there are a number of grants available through there. But, you know, I would, if you want to look at disability specific grants, I would look to the Department of Social Services. They would have more opportunities there that is a bit more directed. But also, please feel free to get in touch with us. We have a list of alternative sources of funding outside of Great New South Wales. And yeah, we can share a couple of the grants that we've got on that list. Yeah, I just wanted to ask for the people that's listening in, do you have any questions for Kerri and David? This is your chance to find out what goes on in their head when they're assessing those application of yours. Let's just see. We have Jade, Karen, Keaton, Garcia, Sarah.
Mhm. While they're thinking, I had one thing that I was dying to say before the end of this session, which relates back
Go
to
ahead.
Kerri's. Yeah, which relates back to Kerri's point about using word count appropriately and so on. It's this question of impact. And Kerri, I hope you agree with me that a lot of the way in which a lot of people approached impact was to think that that was to present their marketing plan, and actually, telling people about an event is not impact. It's actually how people receive the event and how that event makes a difference, and what is the difference before and after your event or activity or presentation of your art. And I was reading the guidelines published by Create New South Wales last night, and actually there's a very clear statement about impact, which is what is the difference this is going to make. So there has to be a commitment on the part of the organisation to understanding, where you are now and what is that difference and how are you going to measure that and how are you going to track it and why is that a need. But that was a fundamental point that kept coming up for me, was that people were basically presenting their marketing plans within the impact box, and it's just a point of clarification that I really wanted to make sure that people are clear on the difference.
That's just reminded me of one thing that I remembered too, that I think it came up consistently in the last round anyway, was diversity of audiences, of course, and audience development came up a lot because it's vitally important that we are a diversifying audience. But lots of claims were made that they were going to diversify their audience simply by having diverse program, and that if they presented diverse work, diverse audiences would come. I think a big thing with that is if you are going to talk about diversifying your audience through a diversity in programming, which of course is to be commended, you also need to have relationships within those communities of audiences. So partnerships with community groups, direct outreach to ensure that you're not just putting on a diverse program, but you are actively engaging a diverse group of people and audiences to let them know that that show is on and that you are having those partnerships, because it isn't just enough to say that you're going to pop a diverse program in. I think that was a really consistent problem, and I suppose it feeds back into David's generalized kind of making generalized sweeping statements.
Yeah, so what I'm hearing from both of you there is that if you do wish to present something for a particular audience, that you actually substantiate, like, that you have that particular audience, or you substantiate how you're going to get that particular audience. That and you also can't make any assumptions that you are going to have one. And so, do your research beforehand. There's a lot of different ways that you can do your research, even, making use of, Facebook, for example, and sample ads. You can definitely do, some mini surveys, or, if a similar project has been done in the past, you might like to have a look at those particular projects and see what kind of audiences that particular project attracted. Or, talk to people with similar values as you, people who are intending to do the same thing, and, figure out, how they're speaking to their communities. That would really help, not just your own project, but it would really help your application as well. So, we've got a question, yay! Someone just said, thank you for all the information and great tips. But someone also mentioned, Kerri mentioned establishing and developing a relationship with Create New South Wales. a list of other funding grant sources. Is there a list you can share, please? So maybe that's a question for me. So definitely on the Create New South Wales website, I'm just gonna skip ahead a little bit. Okay, oh no, it's actually, so on the Create New South Wales website, we currently have highlighted there like the funding and support tab, but if you click the Arts in New South Wales one, there's actually a list of organizations that you might be interested in contacting. So on that particular page, there's a link to state cultural significant state organizations, major organizations, as well as small to medium organizations and service organizations. Particularly for people starting out, I would highly advise that you speak to service organizations, and there is one for nearly all the art forms. There isn't quite a specific one for festivals in general, but definitely you'd find one for music or for theatre, as well as visual arts. So, you can definitely start there.
There is the Australian Association of Festivals, and they have a lot of resources as well.
Mm-hmm. Thank you for that. David, are you aware of potentially other sources of support?
No, I think that's a really good tip. I mean, when I was starting out, what I used to do was trawl other people's websites and see where they were getting funding from, and look in the back of concert programs and say, oh yeah, okay, that foundation or this whatever, So actually, that's not such a bad place to start. If you know of a similar organisation who has success in the kind of area that you're working in, go and see who's funding them.
Awesome. Thank you both for that. So we have a question. If submissions for the next round of funding close on the 1st of March, how long does it take to assess, and when can applicants expect to receive a response? So that came from Jade. Thank you so much for that question, Jade. So as you can probably imagine, Kerri, David, and the rest of the Artform Board members, they go through a strenuous lot of decision making throughout this process. So to just let you know, what happens is, Kerri, David, and the individual Artform Board members would read each application that is received by their Artform, and they would score and assess those applications. And then they come together as a board. So each Artform Board would come together to discuss those applications. They would rank them and put forward an initial set of recommendations. Subsequently, there's further consideration that happens in conjunction with Create New South Wales, where Create New South Wales will provide advice regarding the distribution of applications across all art forms. We also consider community needs, sector needs, priority areas, as well as, of course, the amount of funding available. And then, that all gets put together in a final set of recommendations that goes to the minister for his consideration and his final approval. So all of that takes a number of months. So with this particular round, you could expect an outcome by mid-June, and that's currently in the guidelines. Knock on wood that just because of sometimes things just do happen, but that's what we're working to at the moment. But yeah, it just takes a little while. Does that help, Jade? Awesome. Does anybody else have any questions?
Kerri, do you think? Oh, Kerri, I was just going to say, do you think we should raise the, the commercial festivals and the large festivals that are applying for a discrete project within those? Yeah, because that certainly came up as a discussion point for the festivals board. And so we saw some very, very large established festivals with enormous turnovers applying for funding to Create New South Wales, which is entirely appropriate and within the guidelines. It's no problem. I think that within that, there was always a question then about where does any surplus or profit go from that organisation. But one of the things that we highlighted in our discussion is that if it is a large-scale festival like that, applying for an element of their program, it's almost best to treat that as a discrete project and show that project within their budget clearly, so it can be shown, you know, what the in terms of the narrative, how the project fits in or enhances, adds to their festival, and then within the budget actually showing how that project is accounted for in terms of income and expenditure within their overall P&L kind of statement, so that sort of in and out is absolutely clear. And I think that would be helpful. And there was a suggestion from another festival board member that actually that some really established large commercial festivals might actually think of a alternative kind of governance structure in order to allow them to apply for grants and for that to be accounted for discreetly beside their commercial activities. Is that a fair summary, Kerri?
Yes, I don't really have anything to add. I think you've covered it, David. I think we're encountering these things now because the Festivals Board is a new board, and it's fantastic to have it included in Create's Artform boards because it's vitally needed, and especially in COVID recovery period, we're going to see a lot of support needed to be provided to festivals, because people have taken a hit, but also because they're a great way to drive recovery to communities. But it is very important that we're able to assess those elements individually of what the funding is actually going to go to in those larger scale commercial operations.
Yeah, on that, you know, something that is a definite frequently asked question for us is around budgets. And yeah, like I know that we have a very semi-complicated budget template, but it does have a particular purpose. And I wonder from both of you, would you have any particular tips for people out there putting together the budget and filling out the Create New South Wales budget template?
Well, yeah, I have some thoughts on that. Shall I go, Kerri?
Yeah, go.
So, I remember being in a discussion like this before, and somebody said, well, I structure my budget this way, so does that mean I have to rework my whole budget to fit your template? And the answer is yes. You're applying to somebody who wants to invest in your organization, and actually, if that is a step you have to go through, that is a step you have to go through. That's just one of those things. So, my view there is that, you're just going to have to live with it. From my experience of using the templates, if you've got somebody who's a good Excel user, you can manipulate the template so that it works for how you want to present. So if the notes field isn't big enough, find somebody who knows how to use Excel to expand the notes field who can help you put that narrative in. So I think that's the key thing. And what I would say is that if you have to go through that process of restructuring your budget to suit the Create New South Wales template, that work isn't wasted, because if you're successful in getting the grant, you have to then report against how you've presented the budget in the template. So actually you should then really be working on the project in terms of managing the finances of the project. You should be using that format that Create New South Wales have provided, and it will make your acquittal so much easier down the line. So it's not at all a wasted journey. But for me, I think that there is that principle of saying, yeah, you are asking in some cases for, up to $140,000. If it means you have to restructure your budget, so be it.
Sure, Kerri, do you have anything to add to that?
No, but I would just echo David's points from much earlier on around detail. The more information we have, the better, and just ensuring that it matches thoroughly any claims that you've made in your application. Very important.
Yeah, no, so just a couple of tips from me. I guess on the actual template itself. So firstly, do fill out the template before attempting to fill out the Smarty Grants budget section, because the template would actually give you the information that you need for the Smarty Grants application form. Secondly, also please just read the instructions first, and also going over the key terms would be helpful when you finally get to the summary. And if you're an organization, the balance sheet tab, those would just make your life so much easier. And probably lastly, and this is across all budget, not just Great New South Wales, that make sure that you are asking for what you need, even though you can apply for, up to $60,000 in terms of project funding, or up to $140,000 for annual organization funding. Do look at what you need, and adjust for it accordingly. And also, yeah, just make sure that you are paying people at industry standards, and you can get those industry rates again of service organizations, as well as other groups like Live Performance and MEAA. So and we do look at those budgets closely. And in fact, Great New South Wales provide a report to the Artform boards to help them with the viability section of the assessment process. So, are there any other questions? If not, I might give you back 5 minutes of your time.
Okay, good.
Is yeah, David, Kerri, do you have any, like we've gone through your top 3 tips, but yeah, if you have any other last parting words.
Well, I would say again that, I think the Great New South Wales guidelines are probably as clear as they've ever been just now. So I think they're really helpful. I think it's always helpful to bear in mind what the grant funder you're applying to is trying to achieve through the work, and how does your grant actually help that grant funder achieve their work. That's always, it shouldn't be your, primary motivation, but it's always good to have in the back of your mind. And often it's helpful to kind of just structure your application in the way that the guidelines outline, so that for panelists like us who are reading loads of applications, we can see that this bullet point relates to this paragraph in the application and so on, and that it's kind of systematic. Those kind of things are always really helpful on a practical basis. But because the Great New South Wales guidelines are so clear at the moment, I think actually they do provide quite a good template for completing the application itself. So I would just have them right beside you when you're making your application. Keep referring back and saying, to Kerri's point earlier, am I addressing the question appropriately?
Yeah, and my final takeaway would be, know that we want to give you money, and so the more clarity we have, the more detail, not superfluous detail, but backing up evidence detail, the easier it is for us to help you get your funding, would be my my takeaway.
Great. Thank you both again for your time this morning and all those golden nuggets that you've shared. They have been really helpful, not just from the application perspective actually, but just having your projects completed. On that note, I just wanted to show people again that we do have these information. So a lot of the bits that I've mentioned is included in the Making an Application Help Guide. So you can find that on the Great New South Wales website under the Funding and Support tab and Help for Funding Applicants. So have a look at that, make use of it, and of course, you're most welcome to get in touch with us if you need further support. we also have other fact sheets there. And as I mentioned earlier, please do get in touch with those other organizations as well. But thank you all for being part of this session this morning. We wish you all the best in your application and with your projects. And we look forward to reading them. So thank you, everyone.
Very good.
And
Good luck.
good luck. Thank you.